Well, God doesn't require protection, but if I'm making a claim that's controversial, that has eternal consequences, that matters, and Jesus made those claims all the time, then it does matter whether we have reason to take it seriously. And Jesus, he encountered this. It's interesting. In John 5 and in John 8, he makes different statements that are similar, but he basically says, you're not going to believe me because I'm just one guy. I'm just one witness, okay? You need two or more witnesses. He's referring to that in the law. Look at, okay, what about Moses? Moses bore testimony to me. What about John the Baptist? You guys liked him. He bore testimony to me. What about these miracles that I'm working? These bore testimony. What about the scriptures? The scriptures who heralded my coming. These bore testimony. So even Jesus is saying, you can add to my claims about reality, the world, which are weighty, and there's a lot at stake. You can decide whether you're going to trust them or not based on the reasons I'm giving you. And see, this is something that's unique. You have some of that in Islam, but for the most part in other religions, you don't have apologetics. You don't have a field dedicated to defending based on evidences. You either kind of take it or leave it.
Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin back again. And today we have another special guest with us. We have Greg Koukl from his Stand to Reason YouTube channel. He is the founder and the host of that channel, and he also has a master's in philosophy of religion and Christian apologetics. He's a teacher and author, so I think he has a lot of understanding about the Christian faith and making defenses for it.
I hope you got some questions lined up, because this guy, regarding Christianity, because if anybody knows their stuff, it seems like it would be him.
All right. Well, we won't keep you guys waiting. Let's get into it. All right, Greg, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It is so great to have you on here. You've got your wonderful podcast out there, Stand to Reason. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we like to kind of like break the ice here is just kind of get a little bit of the backstory. How did this all begin for you? How did you get the channel up and running? And what has made you decide to really take a focus in your life as a defender of the faith, get really into the Christian apologetics there?
Well, it's a long story because I'm an old guy, so I'll try to, ease you through it here. I was raised Roman Catholic, so I started out with a kind of Christian background, okay? I think a lot of people are raised in a church environment, but end up not having anything substantive happen for them spiritually. It's kind of an activity. It's a religious activity. And in the mid-'60s, when I was in high school and started college, that's when I was actually challenged about my convictions then, such as they were. And somebody asked me, my girlfriend's sister actually, asked me, do you really believe that, the Roman Catholic stuff? And I paused for a moment. I thought I actually had no reason to believe it. I was just that was momentum coming out of my childhood. And so I said, no, I guess I don't. And that's when I really made my formal departure. It was never like I was really convinced that Catholicism, or even Christianity in a broader sense, was true. Now, I'm going to be careful how I use this word true because it can be really misunderstood. So when I say the word true, I mean the word true the way gravity is true. Okay. So I could be mistaken given that the claim is a claim about objective reality. And so I could be mistaken about my own convictions or whatever, but I never really took Catholicism to be true or Christianity to be true in a deep sense then. And that's what I realized when I was a teenager, like a lot of people who are raised in some kind of religious environment, whether it's Christian or otherwise. They just say, hey, this isn't me. And look at when you're 18 or 19 years old, especially in the mid-'60s, I mean, and the hormones are flowing, and you're feeling excitement about a whole new world that was opening up to you, especially at that time with the counterculture movement. Mm-hmm. You don't want to think about purity and holiness and that kind of stuff. Your mind's going elsewhere. So I did that for about 6 years and just did my own thing and trying to find some kind of spiritual satisfaction. I wasn't really a an atheist or anything, but I didn't really know what was going on. Something was going on, maybe. And then I got to a point in my life where I realized on my own philosophies, I was actually pretty alone. And now I wasn't speaking subjectively at this point. I was saying that the way that I was assessing reality was that there was nobody out there ultimately that cared. There was no ultimate purpose for me. There was no direction. That's where my philosophies at that point in my life were leading me, and I called it cosmic alienation. It's like, man, this is a bummer. But what that by itself didn't make a difference for me. It was just the realization of where all of my thoughts ended up leading. And to me, that's a really big deal. And you mentioned earlier that you saw me on DOAC, Diary of a CEO. And this is one of the points that I was trying to make. Look, if there is no God who establishes the universe for a purpose and a reason and makes human beings for a purpose or a reason, then it's a crapshoot. It's whatever, because you're all by yourself. And by the way, then the whatever is whatever. You could be a Mother Teresa if you want, or you could be Dirk the sex slave trader if you want. There's no moral difference between them if there's no criteria to decide. And so that was the realization that I came to in the early 70s. And at that time, my younger brother had become a Christian. We had 5 kids in our family, and all the kids everybody left Catholicism when we all grew up, even my parents. So we weren't doing that trip anymore. But my younger brother became a Christian during the Jesus movement. Then he started coming back on me with the Jesus stuff, which I thought same old, been there, done that kind of deal. Not interested. I'm too smart for that. That was honestly my attitude. I'm too smart for that. I figured, most Christians were either dumb or ugly, and I mean, they had to get acceptance somewhere, so they went to church because you had to love each other. That was love one another was was on the banner in the back of the church, or else they're just too stupid to think for themselves. So anyway, that was a pretty condescending view, and I'm a little embarrassed about it now, but that was my attitude then. And then I started listening, and I can't really tell you there was this dramatic kind of thing that happened, boys. I just started paying attention to the things that my brother was telling me about Jesus. And a huge part of what I heard from him was different than what I'd been raised with. Because you guys know, with your own Christian background, you know the difference between law and grace. Law is like you work your butt off to try to please God, and you never quite get there because you're always aware of what you do wrong.
Yeah.
Grace is forgiveness, mercy, the kindness of God that he makes available through his son, Jesus. And that was what began to appeal to me. And I don't even know the switch around, but it was sometime in the mid to late 70s, fall of 73, that I just kind of, again, I wish I could say this was it, but I came to the realization this is actually true. This is really true. The smart money is on Jesus. Now, I hadn't worked out all my questions then, but I just had this strong conviction. And so that's when I committed myself to follow Christ. And that happened in September 1973. And I've been doing that ever since. So that's 52 years now. And it was when I was at UCLA at the time, and I was in Westwood Village, and all kinds of crazy trips going on then. You could get in conversations with all kinds of folk, on the street of Westwood Boulevard and the Village and all that. All kinds of goofy trips going on, and people were happy to talk, and the Jesus movement was happening, the Hare Krishnas were there, and a whole bunch of other groups. And so I'd get in conversations with people, except for they'd ask questions I couldn't answer. And I wanted answers myself. And so that's when I started to study. And it was in the process of those first few years of studying different people like C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer. I'm not sure if you're familiar with all of these names, but these are people that started, Josh McDowell, that began that approached this whole project of Christianity in a whole different way than I had thought about it before. Not just from how do you feel and what do you quote unquote believe, but what's actually true. What is the world actually like? Is God real? If he is real, is he the kind of God that the New Testament or the biblical corpus describes? Is Jesus God come down? Emmanuel, God with us. Did he rise from the dead? All of these are very relevant questions in light of the larger perspective of life. And so the more I studied, fellows, the more it became obvious to me, and this is the way I put it now, is that the Christian understanding of reality, the whole thing, is the best understanding of the way things are, the best explanation for the way things are. And there, maybe we can get into some of the details, but there are all kinds of particulars that we realize are human beings are spiritual creatures. You stay spiritual. You guys know this. Big common ground between us. And these atheists that just want to reduce, like Alex O'Connor on the show that we mentioned earlier, want to reduce everything to molecules in motion. That's not going to work because there's more here than that, and everybody knows it. Part of it is moral. You know, we all, doesn't matter where you live or when you live, everybody knows something's wrong with the world, you know, it's broken. And that's the problem of evil. That's why they raise it all of the time. But if you're going to be a materialistic atheist, nothing's broken, and because there's no way it's supposed to be. So it can't be the way it's not supposed to be, right? Well, that doesn't match reality. I think deep down inside, well, I'll know better. And so a lot of these things were coming together for me. And though I was committed to Christianity as the truth of the way the world actually was, and Jesus being the Messiah and the Savior, and all the other things that are involved in that, I was building my case over time about why this made so much sense and how this fit. And so my journey into apologetics, defending Christianity, was just a natural step of my own journey. And as I learn more things, since I'm telling other people about these things as well, and the amazing wonder of the grace of God on behalf of people he didn't have to forgive. You know, the book of Romans, Paul writes, he said, even while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He came after us. You know, he did this for us. That's amazing. And so the more I'm learning about this, and the more I'm learning not only is the message of salvation and forgiveness and mercy up against the truth of personal rebellion and sin and wickedness, is that message is magnificent. But I had more and more reason to think that it's actually an accurate message. And so that's what I've given myself to. 32 years ago, I started an organization. I was, let's see, about 50, almost 20 years old as a Christian at the time. But that's when I started Stand to Reason. And I guess I was 20 years old exactly as a Christian. So I was well into my Christian life and studies and stuff like that. I had bachelor's degree in the Bible by that point, and I had a master's degree in apologetics, and I was still working on a master's in philosophy, which I found to be really helpful to me in trying to assess these questions and make the case for my own views over and against other views. There are more than one story of reality, obviously, and they can't all be true. And then they could all be false, but they can't all be true. In any event, so this organization I started with a goal of trying to enter the conversation, which, as you guys know, sometimes can be a little bit intense.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
yeah.
when Christians would engage with, I think, the best ideas, they were just they were kind of shrill. And a lot of their approach was shallow. So I think people say, well, Christianity is stupid, and I look at my Copleston's history of philosophy, which is about 12 volumes from the time of the ancients until the modern time, and virtually from the time of Jesus until about the 18th century, virtually every single person in there was a deeply committed Christian theist. These guys were smart. They weren't stupid. So we have great ideas to offer the world. Why were we being shallow in the way we're approaching it? So I thought maybe I can offer something different, and not just my own voice, as it were, but training other Christians. And so that's really what Stand to Reason is about. Our mission statement starts, we train Christians. And then it continues to think more carefully about our convictions and to make the case with grace and effectiveness, hopefully, that Christianity is actually true in the way that gravity is true. And so that's been 32 years now. We've got 20 people on our team. And, I've had unbelievable adventures in those 32 years. I never expected it to be the way it is. I've lectured on 6 continents. Nobody's asked me to go lecture to the penguins there in South Pole yet, but and all over the country, over 90 university campuses, trying to make the case that Jesus, the smart money is on Jesus. So that's kind of my thumbnail sketch. Sorry for talking so much here,
Oh,
but
that's great.
No, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. You are clearly a well-read, intelligent person, and it's funny, like, that seems to be a character trait of some people. You're a Christian and you're well-read and you care about the epistemology and academic rigor. You've got 2 degrees, it looks like.
2 master's degrees, yeah.
And I wonder what you think sometimes when you see somebody that shares the same belief as you. And I wonder what anybody that's religious thinks when they share the same belief with people and they see something that is not coming from a place that like Jesus would likely even be coming from, like a hate-filled place or something. Like you're doing your due diligence and you're going around and you're doing that, but not everybody takes on religion the same way. A lot of people do sort of like take it at that shallow level and are bought in hook, line, and sinker because it seems right or something like that. What do you wish people cared more about in Christianity? Like, what kind of questions do you wish came at you more often? What's the type of stuff that at this point in your life, after this long history of like learning apologetics and everything, what interests you most about Christianity? What do you wish people were doing? What do you not like to see?
There's a lot that you said there, Justin, and probably a lot of directions I could go here. I did pause for a moment when you used the word hate, because this is a
maybe not hate, yeah, like whatever. You know what I mean? I'm imagining the stereotypical person with like a God hates explicitive, sign or something like that.
Yeah, well, there's almost no people like that I know or see around, but those are the guys who get on the news.
Right.
So if
yeah,
it bleeds,
yeah.
it leads. I mean, there was a guy
Fair
from Kansas
point.
that had signs that said AIDS cures fags or something like that. I mean, it was really grotesque. And it's pretty obvious to anybody who is familiar with Jesus that this guy didn't represent Jesus. Okay. Even though he might have shared some moral convictions that Jesus had, it was the way that he was carrying it about and approaching people that showed that he did not have the heart that Jesus had that matches the convictions. So now some people want to make Jesus into Jesus meek and mild, and he was a very judgmental man by today's standards when you read Jesus. I mean, he cut the lines very clearly between right and wrong, and but he was very generous towards the repentant, whether they were rich or poor, whether they were religious or not so religious. So he picked up people pick on the Pharisees and the scribes a lot because they were big targets for Jesus, but there were a lot of other people too. He didn't care so much about that. He cared about what his language in Matthew 5, the poor in spirit. And you might remember the parable that he gave of the Pharisee at the front of the synagogue, and the tax gatherer who they were hated because they were extortionists in that time, and they were siding with the Romans, who's the one in the back beating his breast saying, God have mercy on me, a sinner. That's the one who goes back justified. So I guess my concern here, let me just back up for a second. The reason I paused about hate, and I know you want to change that word, but sometimes it comes up because it's associated with strong moral convictions. And so those with a strong moral conviction of a certain sort are called haters. Not that you are doing that, but I'm just in the vernacular right now. And so I just wanted to clarify, you can have strong moral convictions and not be a hater. Matter of fact,
Doesn't God even hate some things though? Like, I don't mean to be. I'm just saying I don't even necessarily have a problem with hate. You know what I mean? Like we've got love and hate exists, and I'm not trying to pin that on anything. But I do believe there are Bible verses where I think it says something about God hating something.
Psalm 5 and Psalm 11, for example. I just read Psalm 11
right
2 nights ago, as it turns out. Yeah.
I don't mean to be hung up on the word hate, and I'm more saying that we're all we all different types out there, you know what I mean? And some of us are academic types, and some of us, we take it upon ourselves to become apologists and
Sure.
prove what we happen to believe, and I guess just to make it a little bit more amiable question would be, what are the type of questions, or what meets you where you're at when people have questions for you that gets you excited? You like the direction the person's thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, I didn't take umbrage at the word. I just kind of wanted to
Sure.
talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that a little
yeah. I
bit.
see your point.
So
Yeah.
I think that I get turned on when people are genuinely seeking and trying to find what is true. All right, and and they're open to hearing both sides of the issue. Now, let's take atheism, for example, since you brought up the DOAC, Diary of a CEO, that I was on it's about a month ago is when it aired. And Alex O'Connor was on there, and he was straight across the table from me. He was probably the most famous atheist in the world right now. And there's something I admire about Alex, and that is a certain candor that he has. I don't know how deeply open he is to Christianity. I was weighing some of the challenges that he offered me that I thought were weak cheese, actually, but he does it so well that it's hard, it's hard to take issue unless you can kind of see the difficulties or the problems that he's raising or some of the rhetorical moves that he's using. Nevertheless, he's not like a hardline like a Christopher Hitchens was, or even like
Hmm.
Richard
Hmm.
Dawkins is now. Richard Dawkins won't even debate William Lane Craig, who is the most well-known Christian philosopher alive
He
today,
won't do it anymore.
debating everybody. Pardon me?
He won't do it anymore. He's got so many debates under his belt. It seems like maybe he's
Yeah,
just
well,
sick
I
of it.
guarantee you, Bill would debate Richard Dawkins if Richard was
Hmm.
willing to do that, Professor Dawkins rather. But nevertheless, so there everybody thinks that what they believe is actually true. That's the
Hmm.
nature of a belief.
Hmm.
It's to hold that something's true. But
Hmm.
some people hold, but my own view is that you should hold to your convictions with the strength that your justification allows. So if you have really great justification for something, good, solid reasons, well, stick to your guns, especially if it's really important. If there are problems in your view, and I think there are massive problems with atheism, absolutely massive problems with it, that willingness to be open to hear the other side and actually weigh it, that turns me on. I would love to have a conversation mano a mano with no cameras rolling with Alex O'Connor. There were
Hmm.
8 cameras rolling
Hmm.
for 5 hours and 15 minutes. It got whittled down to 3 hours and 23 minutes or something, but that was a long time. And there's a lot at stake. When you're on camera, you can't help but be aware of everyone
Yeah.
watching, and you have a reputation.
It's like the double slit experiment. It's the molecules or whatever behave differently when they're not observed.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't know if that's actually so. People
No,
make that's
I'm
like
just
the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Yeah, that
yeah,
observation changes everything. It doesn't change
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
It changes molecule, location, electron, whatever. In any event, the point is, yeah, when people are listening, you got an audience. There's a different kind of thing at stake. I felt it myself, you know, and as it turns out, there's about 2 million people have watched that podcast already in the last few weeks. But it's different when it's just man to man, as it were. No playing to the camera, no whatever. That's a whole different circumstance. Now,
Hmm.
I will say though that, like I said a moment ago, I think that Alex has an unusual candor. He admits the mystery of consciousness. He said, "I can't make sense of consciousness." The one reason is if you're a physicalist, you can't reduce human awareness or any sentient creature's awareness to something physical. It's not molecular. It's a whole different kind of thing.
Hmm.
And that suggests that it resides in a whole different kind of place than the body, like
Hmm.
maybe the soul. And so this is something physicalists have a really hard time making sense of. And so much so that Daniel Dennett, one of the 4 so-called new atheists, Daniel Dennett died last year. Chris Hitchens died a few years before. There's only 2 alive anymore. I guess I could joke with a dark sense of humor and say, well, they're no longer atheists. But in any event, Daniel Dennett was so frustrated with consciousness that he just said, well, consciousness is an illusion. Now, this guy is brilliant, right? But that is a silly statement. And here's why. Because you could ask, what's an illusion? An illusion is when your consciousness is being appeared to in a false way, right?
Is something happening or not?
That's
Clearly,
right.
something's happening here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question is, if you have to have consciousness to have an illusion, then is the illusion having an illusion? It's just silly. But the point I'm making is that's one of the problems that atheists have. And so when I'm back to your question there, Justin, when I'm talking with somebody who's trying to make sense of the world and is trying to take all the aspects of the world that we're aware of and try to hold them in tension and balance with a coherent worldview. This to me is really important. Every religion tells a story. The question is whether the story the religion tells fits the way the world actually is. It's kind of like a map. You can make all kinds of maps, but if the map doesn't fit the topography, you're going to get lost. You're not going to get to where you want to go, kind of thing. So anyway, that's the kind of questions that I like. And I don't have all the answers. I think there's a lot of challenges. Christianity has a lot of loose ends. All right, it's messy, but there's a reason for that, and the reason is that life is messy, and every religious view or non-religious view is messy. And I just think that taken as a whole, the way Jesus understood the world is a lot less messy for me than most other worldviews. And this is one of the reasons I think that it's actually a sound, accurate worldview.
Well, is Alex O'Connor the guy I'm thinking of? The British young guy?
Yeah.
He's 26 years old.
I didn't know that you interviewed that guy.
You didn't interview him. He's on the same show as.
Oh yeah, well, I really like that guy, and I'll just quickly say this: I like that he does his kind of rigorous logic, rationality thing, and he really stays away from like he keeps it not dramatic, like he keeps it pretty like amiable, I guess. You know what I mean? Like
more or
he
less.
just
No histrionics, really.
And the candor, like you said too. You said it perfectly. Yeah.
He was pretty tough on me in that interview, though. He would say, I don't mean to interrupt, but then he'd interrupt. He said, I don't mean to be difficult here. And then he'd be difficult. Well, that's all right. I mean, that's the way these things go. I wasn't offended by it, but it was just part of the interplay, the drama, the dance, so to speak, and those kinds of things. My concern is that people don't get taken in by rhetoric, anybody's rhetoric. I'm trying not to make rhetorical appeals in a way that masks what's true. To make a false idea or maybe a weak idea look strong. I'm willing to say, look, I don't have an answer to that, or I haven't worked through all of that myself. And those are some of the loose ends. But when we got in that discussion about suffering, animal suffering, you might have remembered that Alex O'Connor does not believe in objective morality. He rejects the idea that there are objective moral rules. Now, that's very consistent with atheism. Because if you have objective morality governing the world, then you have to have an objective moral maker, to provide that in some fashion. So he rejects that. He thinks that moral statements like rape is wrong is you're just emoting when you say that. But then he's taken me to task for animal suffering before the fall, before sin entered the world on the Christian characterization of things. He's taken me to task for that. Like, you got such a lousy explanation, somebody ate a fruit and then that's why this woman's child is dying of cancer. That's pretty lame. Basically, that's the point that he was making. Now, sometimes you think of these things when you're reviewing afterwards, you're in the midst of these conversations that are intense with the cameras rolling, you're doing the best you can, but there's a little bit of a fog of war kind of situation. And afterwards, it's like in reflection, it's all going in slow motion. And you think, oh, I could have jumped in here and said this. But this is what occurred to me regarding that issue. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And within a couple days, the U.S. declared war on Japan. And within a couple days of that, Hitler did the stupidest thing in his whole reign. He declared war on the United States. And then, and then, and then the British declared war on Japan. I mean, it was like everybody's declaring war. But when Hitler declares war on the United States, he can't reach us. We're all the way across the pond. And we're the biggest industrial power in the world, untouchable. And once we got rolling, in 4 years, the strategic air bombing system of the RAF and the U.S. Air Force leveled virtually every building in the entire country of Germany. There were no more targets left to bomb in 1945 at the end of the war. In other words, the decision of one man, Adolf Hitler, unleashed misery and suffering on millions and millions of people that never entered into his decision. So this makes the point that people make decisions that have effects on other people, and those effects can be really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not so far-fetched then if our first parents were created in moral innocence and then acted in a rebellious way that broke the world and ruined the world for everybody else. We understand how that works. But Alex was working hard to make that look stupid and characterize it in the most uncharitable way. Now, again, I expect that that's what he's going to do. My project is trying to help people to see that that's not so stupid, and we have an intuition about how these things work that fits nicely with this circumstance.
You mentioned some of the messy parts there just a bit ago, and as being someone in the apologetics field, what would you say is the hardest thing that you've had to come to terms with, that you've wrestled with internally in your faith as you're doing this exercise? As something that may refute what you're actually looking for, and then to balance that, juxtapose that against the best evidence, the best thing that you found that supports what you believe and promotes it.
Yeah, that's a great question, James. And I would say the hardest, and I've said this before, the hardest issues or challenges, messy parts of Christianity, none of them have to do with the challenges that non-believers raise. All of the issues like problem of evil and the biblical things and all this other stuff, those to me are not very demanding, all right? Because I think there are good answers for most of these things if people are willing to listen. I think the hardest issues are the theological ones, the internal theological ones, and classically like sovereignty and freedom and individual freedom. How does God secure his purposes and still human beings make meaningfully free choices? By the way, you know, an atheist doesn't have that problem, not because there's no God in there in a certain sense. It's because he's a physicalist. And if you're a physicalist, that means everything is determined by the necessary and prior physical conditions that come before. It's just like a bunch of dominoes falling. Sam Harris, one of the new atheists, he's a determinist because physicalism determines determinism. But it's so odd for him to say that because he thinks he came to that conclusion by thinking about it. But if determinism is true, then he was determined to believe in determinism, just like I am determined to believe in something else. It's kind of crazy.
There's Christians that are determinists, aren't there? Like, wouldn't Calvinism fall into that?
Well, that has to be parsed out fairly carefully. There are some things a Calvinist would say are determined, and most Calvinists that I know would not say that every single thing is determined. There are choices we make, but God somehow secures the outcomes to fulfill his plans. We're not little machines. This is not machine-like behavior, but that's what a physicalist is stuck with. Now, there are going to be some Calvinists that hold that view, but I think they're kind of rare. They are going to say that it is God's sovereign choice who gets forgiven and who doesn't, because that's up to him. He's not obliged to forgive anybody or show mercy to any criminal, just like no criminal who is a real criminal deserves a pardon. But the governor may give a pardon, or the president, in certain circumstances. It doesn't mean they got to empty the prisons. So in that sense, on the Reformed or Calvinistic view, whether people receive the grace of God or not is up to him. But that doesn't mean we're all machines. That
Yeah.
isn't the view. However, that is what physicalists are stuck with. We're all machines. So, and I think that I don't. Let me back up and put it this way: I don't know how somebody like Alex can escape that conclusion if he's going to stick to his physicalism. So, but those are the hardest ones. How does God work in such a way where we make meaningful choices? And I think this is true that we do, yet His purposes still get accomplished. Okay, so that's one of them. I think there's a mystery, a profound mystery of how God becomes a man. And actually, strictly speaking, God doesn't change into a human being. He takes humanity on to his divinity. So Jesus is both a human being and divine at the same time, two natures. So, but that's weird. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
man, that's pretty amazing. And in a way, too, it's pretty sublime because if you think about God, at least the Christian characterization of God, in perfect bliss and happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction, like forever, deciding to take on a human body. Remember, Emmanuel means God with us. God came down and entered in to be with us and reveal himself to us and suffer the privations of fallen humanity. Though Jesus wasn't fallen himself, he still had to live in a fallen world. And of course, the way his life ended, it was brutal.
Mm.
And so that's also a mystery. Now, I don't think these are problems for Christianity. And I think your question was, what is the
The
most
best.
problematic element
Oh.
there? And I think that the hardest thing to deal with right now, and the popular sentiment has raised these issues, has to do with the nature of the Old Testament revelation and God working through the nation of Israel in different kinds of ways, taking over the land, people being killed en masse, in wars that seem to be justified, and I think were by God. And I mean, it's called genocide. I think that's not exactly what was going on there, and slavery, which the problem with understanding both of those is they have to be understood in their historical context. And we look back from thousands of years and we put our own sensibilities on what happened then, and we think that's terrible. Yet during that time, the kinds of things that the Mosaic Law did were actually to rescue people and to make it much better than it was under the ancient Near Eastern culture. But those kinds of questions are harder to deal with because they require a deeper understanding of the ancient culture and also some of the languages and the circumstances. And people don't have time to listen to that. So I think that's kind of messy. Now, when it comes to the best arguments, I would say the standard arguments for the existence of God, the cosmological argument, in other words, God is the best explanation for the existence of the cosmos. A Big Bang needs a Big Banger, is the way I put it. I think that it is clear, absolutely clear to everybody that the universe looks designed. Even Richard Dawkins, when he, in the opening paragraph really of The Blind Watchmaker, says something to the effect of the biological realm is a complex realm that gives the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. So even Dawkins is saying it looks designed. Now he's got another explanation, the Darwinian one, but I think the existence of God is the best explanation for the design of the universe too, on all these different parameters, not just in biology, origin of life, and new forms and everything like that. I don't think the Darwinian model is adequate on the merits. So I think that's the case for Jesus. The historical case for Jesus is very, very strong. Even Bart Ehrman, who is one of the strongest critics of the New Testament, former Christian, now written many books about challenging Christianity and the New Testament. At least in his popular works, when he does his academic work, he's a little more guarded in what he says because his feet are being held to the fire a little bit more by the academics. But he'll say, you guys who are Jesus mythers who think Jesus never existed, there's not an academic in the world who's a specialist in this field, regardless of their personal convictions, who agrees with that. That's just dumb. I've got a quotation, I have a video where he's talking on that. It's just amazing. So the historical evidence for the life of Jesus is really good, which also leads to the historical evidence for the thing that is the best explanation for the explosion of Christianity there in the first century, and that is the resurrection, the empty tomb, and the appearances that those followers of his said they had that they took to be so authentic. They ended up spending the rest of their lives at great risk to themselves, spreading that news of his resurrection. These people who turned on a dime, including Saul of Tarsus. So these are all historically well justified events that secure the truth of Christianity. Because as you guys know, Christianity is unique in religions in that it is grounded in history. And it's grounded in the Old Testament, the Jews, and that whole history of the Jews. It's grounded in the person of Jesus. If you take Jesus out of Christianity, you don't have any Christianity anymore because it's not based on his teachings. It's based on his person. And so once we fix his person in history, and we have a reasonably reliable account of his life and his teachings, which virtually everybody acknowledges, then we have a solid standard on which to assess whether he was actually the person he claimed to be or not. That I think is the strongest.
What role has honesty played for you as a Christian?
Well, I guess I'm a little unclear on what area. I mean, there's honesty in terms of personal integrity. You deal with integrity with other people honestly, or you could be honest about your own doubts, or you could be honest
Well,
about the inadequacies of maybe some of the evidence in some cases. What did
I
you have
guess
in mind?
what I've got in mind is I think about the debates that go on, and I'm thinking about like Jordan Peterson versus like a Hitchinson type thing,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking about like the social aspect of it, the idea of what we talked about earlier. When cameras are running, it's not quite the same thing as a mano
Yeah.
conversation, and it's been said a lot of times that like white lies are like our social lubricant in modern times. Sometimes they'll say somebody's neurodivergent because they don't get some aspect of
Yeah.
niceties or manners or whatever.
Right, right.
And so, from a very honest perspective, you know, uh, has has your faith ever been shaken based on something somebody said? And how did you react to that?
Yeah, I get two responses. One, I think honesty is absolutely critical because in everything, even I don't even like white lies, um, because it secures your credibility with other people. And if they can't trust that you mean what you say, then what can they trust? Jesus said, "Let your yes be yes, and your no be no." Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so I believe in that. There have been times where um, I've heard some evidence. This has been a while since this happened, partly because I've gotten a lot of answers to things. It was harder. I was more vulnerable earlier than I am now. I'm thinking one particular point where people, there was some brain assessment, and they were looking at the part of the brain that was glowing when you're thinking religious thoughts or whatever, and what they were trying to explain as religious belief is just a matter of brain chemistry. And I remember when I first heard that, a kind of a chill going up my spine. I mean, it was a very physical thing, like, ay, 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 what am I going to say to that? Now, it didn't take me long to realize that there was a fallacy that was in play there, because no subjective experience or like that, no analysis of your brain activity can inveigh positively or negatively against, say, the historical evidence about Jesus of Nazareth and whether he rose from the dead or not, or whether the evidence for God's existence is good or bad or not. One thing is looking at in a sense, the evidence, the arguments. The other one's looking at a subjective experience. Some people say, for example, "Oh, well, you're a Christian because you were raised in America. If you were raised in, say, Saudi Arabia, you wouldn't be a Christian." And which I'd have to say, I mean, issues of God's sovereignty aside, you're probably right. Now, that was raised to me first as an atheist, but it's irrelevant to anything because it doesn't tell you anything about whether Christianity is true or false or whether Islam is true or false. And by the way, if the atheist was raised in Saudi Arabia, he would be an atheist. You know, he would. So, so notice that these
Hmm.
kinds of things don't tell you anything about the truth of anything. It just tells you about biology, or it tells you about sociology or geography or something, but it doesn't get to the question of the truth of the issue. So when I had that, that chill that went up my spine thinking about the challenge, because it struck me like, oh, it's like OMG moment, right? Maybe I'm wrong. And then I realized what was wrong with that in terms of the broader assessment of Christianity. It didn't really inveigh against anything about the truth of Christianity. So what I did is I learned something that addressed the challenge in a fair and reasonable way. Now, some people, when they're challenged with this point that if they were raised in Saudi Arabia, they wouldn't be a Christian, they'd be an Arab. This is like devastating for them. Devastating for them. They think, oh my goodness, you're right. You're right. And they don't realize it has nothing at all to do with the truth or falsity of Christianity, because it never addresses that issue. It just looks at their psychological or their cultural kind of circumstances. So the more that I've been able to learn about how some of these challenges don't work well to undermine the Christian claim to truth, the easier it's been. And I haven't had one of those in quite a while. What is harder for me, fellas, is when I'm in a back and forth with somebody, like on that DOAC interview, and I feel I can't get the best answers out as quickly as I'd like in the midst of the discussion. And then I wonder if the truth suffers a little bit in the minds of those listening. I do care a lot about that.
Hmm.
They're going to be persuaded in something false because I wasn't as clear as I could have been, or I wasn't as quick on my feet as I could have been. So that's the kind of stuff that comes to mind. Integrity, though, is absolutely critical for me. And I don't think that's true of everybody, even people in our camp. And I tell you, on my team, I mean, you're going to see integrity because we believe in that. We want to live on a stand to reason team. I'm talking about whoever I can have an influence on. We have, because our number one audience, boys, is not before other men; it's before God. And I can call you boys because you're like my grandchildren's
I
age, right?
love it. It makes me feel younger.
I want to ask you because about like
There
look,
it is. There's that about. I heard it.
yeah.
I gotcha.
There's this intellectualizing thing going on here. You got all the books there, and you study the apologetics, and you got all these defenses and stuff like that. But there's also a spiritual side to Christianity and the Bible. You open up the Bible, you've got all these miracles that take place throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I know this question's personal, so answer it however you feel comfortable with. I am always fascinated with our guests, the whether or not they've for themselves had any type of mystical or transcendental experience. Could you talk about a moment that you feel comfortable talking about where
Sure.
you had an experience like that?
Yeah. Well, I have to qualify it in a couple different ways. First of all, there is kind of an ordinary experience of a friendship with God. And this is a day-to-day thing. So I have a sense of God's presence all the time. Right here on my computer screen. You can't see it. I'm pointing to it right here. It says Coram Deo. Coram, Coramdeo. That's Latin, and it means in the presence of God. And it reminds me that every single moment I'm living in the presence of God, not just to be accountable to Him in terms of my behavior, because He's there with me. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So there is that affective element of Christianity that actually is, in my view, is just buttressed by all the other things I'm learning. It isn't like I have this academic stuff going on here, and then I've got to figure out a way to feel warm towards God. It's my confidence in those other things help me be confident before God. Okay, so that's on a day-to-day basis. And I was sitting here before we started, talking to God and asking for His help, and not just doing blah, blah, blah rote prayers, but as I would ask a father, the way I would appeal to a father who's there to help me. Very personal, okay? This is ongoing for me. And it's gotten richer as time has gone on. You know, there are different types of personality. There's left brain and right brain. As you can imagine, I'm more left brain, I guess, right? The right
Whatever
brain
the
is the more,
thinking one is.
yeah, whatever thinking one is, the big mouth thing. So the more affective elements were slower for me to develop, okay? But the way I look at that is that emotions make our life delicious, but careful thinking makes our life safe. I'm going to say it again. Emotions make our life delicious, but careful thinking makes our life safe. And that's where you want it. You want to be careful about, you want even your emotions to be properly informed by the truth. Okay, now with that in mind, there have been some amazing things that have taken place in my life that are obvious examples of God's hand, but I have not had probably the first thing that came to mind when you're asking the question is, have I had like a miraculous event take place? And like, boom, I got healed. Somebody prayed and now I don't have cancer anymore, or something. There's all kinds of great answers to prayer that are examples of that, but that's not the way God's worked in my life. But I'll tell you one thing. I mean, I'll actually maybe give you a couple. So in 1976, when I was like 3 years old in the Lord, I traveled with three other people to Europe. I spent 3.5 months in Europe, and 5.5 weeks working behind the Iron Curtain when there was an Iron Curtain in 6 different communist countries, working with Christians who were suffering for their convictions as Christians. They were martyrs for Christianity. And so we were traveling in Hungary and Romania and the former Soviet Union and Poland and East Germany and Czechoslovakia. Those are the countries we were in, and Yugoslavia also. So part of my job, you had to be really careful because, you know, if you were caught with some Christian's name in a certain country, depending on the conditions, that could be dangerous for them. Even though there are Christian churches that were in these different countries, and even in the particular case in Bucharest, Romania, there was a theological seminary. But we were to go to this seminary, and it was my job to keep track of the address, like. And so what I did is I took the address, I wrote it on a piece of paper, and then I rolled it up into a little bitty ball and hid it somewhere so no one could find it. And guess what? Nobody found it, including me. So we were supposed to meet with these people, right? And so what we did is we spread out a big map of Bucharest. And I mean, that's a big city. That's the capital of the country. And we're asking ourselves, where is this place? I can't remember. And so we just looked at sections and we split up. There were 4 of us. And so Lance and I went on our own to this one area. We had a car driving around. We dropped us off and for some reason, we just thought maybe it's in this area. I don't remember the thinking. But I remember walking along this, looked like apartment buildings mostly. It was more of a residential area with apartment buildings. And I was walking along the street, and then I saw down this sidewalk on the side of a building at the end, almost to the back alley, there was a door, and there was a plaque on the door. And we're just walking around aimlessly, really. And something inside, I don't even want to say said, because I don't think it was that strong. I just had this compulsion to walk the sidewalk and take a look at that sign. And I walked down the sidewalk and I looked at the sign, and it was the theological seminary that we were looking for. And when I knocked at the door, and then somebody saw us and gingerly opened the door, wasn't sure who we were, they invited us in, and there were a bunch of pictures on the wall, and there was a picture of our contact on the wall. So there's like, I mean, God's hand was in that, no question, because we didn't know where to go, and we had prayed about it, but it wasn't like God's saying, okay, go down here, turn left, and walk above. He just accomplished it through our efforts. There's been some other pretty incredible things that have happened. I'm thinking of a relationship that was a very hard one for me. Right after I became a Christian, my high school sweetheart. I can't go into a lot of detail about this, but that was 50 years ago. And actually, I'm still in contact with her and her husband, but there was some question as to whether we were going to be back together or not. And her now husband was her boyfriend at the time, and he wasn't a Christian. And I had a couple that was discipling me, Kathy and Craig Englert. And so my sweetheart, or my former girlfriend, my high school sweetheart, 4 years into college, um, she knew Kathy and Craig, and she wanted her boyfriend to meet Kathy and Craig. Well, he wasn't that interested. So he was working overseas. He was working in hospitals, and he flew all the way to Iran or somewhere to work at a hospital. And then he decided to keep going west and make that east and circumnavigate and come back to Los Angeles. He'd gone eastbound and then blah, blah, blah. But he was going to stop and see his half brother in Hawaii who lived there. Uh, and he just to visit. And so he stopped there to visit, and he walks into the room of his half brother, and there sitting on the couch are Kathy and Craig, the couple who discipled me, who my former girlfriend wanted him to meet and couldn't get him to meet. He flies all the way around the world. He walks into his stepbrother's house, and there they are because they were close friends. And so that was a connector. And then they had a long conversation. That's when he became a Christian. And there were a number of other things that are kind of like this. Now, people might be inclined to say, oh man, that's just a coincidence. Well, it's like the guy said, I don't know, when I stop praying, the coincidences stop happening. That's all I know, kind of thing.
Satisfied?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, at some point you got to say, oh, this is just otherworldly. A lot of things happen by accident, but sometimes you see these things and they just have God's fingerprints on them. And it turns out there were more things associated with that relationship that developed after that, because I was still attached to this gal, and now her new boyfriend's now a Christian, so it's not looking good for me in our future.
Mm-hmm.
But God worked all that out in a really amazing way, and almost like,
Mysteriously.
yeah, it's almost like a supernatural way. There was at one turning point where there was just a trigger, and it just turned inside of me, and the struggle was over. And I could give my blessing to that relationship. And now 50 years later, I'm still in contact with them. And they're empty nesters now, and their family was Christian, and I mean, they're friends, and that's a kind of a rich thing. But God worked that out too. So those are like two things that are actually, I don't talk about either of them very often. But since you asked, yeah,
It's
no
funny,
white
like
lies
when
here.
it comes to that stuff, like I'm mostly familiar with Christian stories of miraculous things, and sometimes it is like a healing story. And I wonder if other people of other religions have similar stories. You know what I mean? I really don't know, but I
Yeah,
wonder if a Hindu person or a Islamic person or whatever. The only thing that comes to mind is like Carl Jung. I don't know if you probably know who that is,
oh
but
yeah, yeah.
he talks about some spooky stuff in terms of synchronicities and that sort of thing.
Right.
But earlier when we were, you were sort of talking about like this is the Christian religion is the only one rooted in history, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about like why Christianity is true and like where it differs from other religions in that way. Like there are a lot of religions that we cover on this channel that approach it from a scientific, like proof based position. You know what I mean? I'm thinking of
Yeah.
Islamic stuff
Oh yeah.
where we've watched videos and they'll weigh it against science and they'll talk about prophetic scriptures within their religion. And I'm careful because I don't just I have a bit of a heart. I'm not really just looking to try to like throw people off of their religion or make people question their religion. I just always want to go a little bit deeper. And so based on that, like why is Christianity more valid than the other religions?
Well, you use the word true, and whenever you use the word true, my answer is going to be the classic understanding of that word, the garden variety definition of that word. When you say something is and it is, or you say something isn't and it isn't, then your statements are true. That's Aristotle, but he got credit for it. But anybody could have figured that one out because that's what we mean when we use the word. And so when I talk about the truth of Christianity, I think the details that it describes match reality. Okay, so when it says in the historical accounts that Jesus rose from the dead, when I say I think that's true, I mean that it actually happened. So 2,000 years ago, if you're in a certain garden tomb, you would have seen this big rock blow away, and this sky comes out of the tomb, all glorious. That's the sense of true that I mean. Now, the next question is, how does one know that his claims are true? And that's where you have to go to the evidence, the information. In the case of Christianity, it is unique there's no miracles in the Quran. All right. It's just not in there.
Well, there's
And
some. There's the one where he turns the pigeon from clay into
that's not the
alive.
Quran,
That's
though.
not the Quran? Or is that the
No,
Hadith?
no, that's the Gospel of Thomas. I think
Well,
that's the
they
Gospel of
mention
Thomas.
it. I think there's been claims that the Quran took that story from the Gospel of Thomas, but we even did a reaction not too long ago. I thought there was the mention of that, and then also Jesus does still have Mary has a virgin birth in the Quran.
Yeah, the point I'm making, though, notice that those are miracles borrowed from Christianity.
Oh,
There are no miracles that are generic to Islam that validate Islam. Now, Muslims think that the book itself is a miracle, and that's the validation. Okay, fair enough. But that's Christianity and Judaism. So I'll deal with these as one whole thing because they're joined at the hip. Actually, that's an understatement. That Christianity flows from Judaism, Old Testament Hebrew prophet Judaism. Okay, modern day Jews don't see it that way. I understand, but they have moved very far away from the Old Testament Jew. They don't practice those things that they practiced then. No temple, etc. The point I'm making, though, is that in both of those revelations, there are significant historical ramifications to their religious convictions. Or maybe back up and put it this way. In both of those, God comes down and does something. So the Exodus is the big thing in the Hebrew scriptures because he rescues these people that he has set aside for a purpose, and he rescues them out of slavery and brings them into a land. But he does so by bringing about 10 different plagues that are each, as it turns out, maybe you didn't know this, are a statement against an Egyptian god. It's directed against an
mm.
Egyptian god. So they worship the Nile. He's going to turn the Nile to blood. Okay. Hey, they worship the sun. He's going to put the sun out. Okay. Um, Life. He's going to take the life of the firstborn, etc. So these are all like theological arguments in the real things happening. He's saying, you think these other gods are going to protect you? No, I am the true God, and they're nothing to me. And boom, 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 boom. So the historical intervention of God in that circumstance is a critical element to the verification of the legitimacy of the theology of the Hebrews. That's the point I'm making. And the same thing is true in the New Testament, principally with the resurrection, but the whole life of Jesus is like that. In these last days, he spoke to us to his son, it says in Hebrews. He spoke in the Hebrew prophets. Now he's spoken through his son, Emmanuel, God with us. And if the history of the primary source documents, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if that's not reliable, then Christianity's done for. That's the point I'm making. It is necessarily rooted in events that actually took place because Christianity is not based on a teaching. It is based on a person who did particular things. And the most important, he died on a cross and then he rose 3 days later. If neither of those things happened, and Islam denies that Jesus died on a cross, well, then Christianity is falsified by that fact. Paul even says in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, look, if we are believing in the resurrection, contrary to fact, people should feel sorry for us. We are most people to be pitied. So
I remember that. I remember that sort of thing being said, but I honestly can't. I couldn't. I wonder if it is. It seems totally possible that historical events could be altered. You know what I mean? For like a purpose that people may do something like that.
you mean the record of the events?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Like
the events
like
are what they were, but you're saying a record of something that happened that didn't
records
happen.
of events. I mean, I guess what I'm saying sort of stupidly is just that I feel like being there would be a factor, and then in light of the argument between faith, the requirement of faith, and then the defense via evidence. I feel like being there would be the best evidence, but none of us were there or could be there or were there when it was being written or what was going to be canon or not. So if I can turn this into a question,
Sure.
I guess it would be, does God or truth, and sort of synonymous, Jesus says, I'm the truth, the way, and the light, God and truth, does it need to be defended? Does it need to be proved? Does God require defense or protection?
Well, God doesn't require protection, but if I'm making a claim that's controversial, that has eternal consequences, that matters, and Jesus made those claims all the time, then it does matter whether we have reason to take it seriously. And Jesus, he encountered this. It's interesting in John 5 and in John 8, he makes different statements that are similar, but he basically says, you're not going to believe me because I'm just one guy. I'm just one witness, okay? You need two or more witnesses. He's referring to that in the law. Look at, okay, what about Moses? Moses bore testimony to me. What about John the Baptist? You guys liked him. He bore testimony to me. What about these miracles that I'm working? These bore testimony. What about the scriptures? The scriptures who heralded my coming. These bore testimony. So even Jesus is saying, you can add to my claims about reality, the world, which are weighty, and there's a lot at stake. You can decide whether you're going to trust them or not based on the reasons I'm giving you. And see, this is something that's unique. You have some of that in Islam, but for the most part in other religions, you don't have apologetics. You don't have a field dedicated to defending based on evidences. You either kind of take it or leave it. And that's the point that I was making earlier.
It's emerging, it seems, though. It seems like we did interview one guy that was sort of like a Hindu apologist.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think he claimed to be an atheist,
Yeah.
but he was an apologist for Hinduism. And then it's something that it's weird because when we were like, you were probably college age or whatever, and you were in Bible college, there were like courses that you could take on how to like win over new believers. and it was like a step by step, like to, appeal to their sentimental, like appeal to their guilt centers and stuff like that. But have you ever done this? Well, the scriptures say this.
Way of the master.
And,
sure.
And I'm not trying to like do some weird punch bowl about. I'm just trying to bring to attention that it seems to be, if maybe in the past that was true, that there wasn't really apologists for other religions. It seems to be a burgeoning thing among religions.
Well, that might be. I'm not familiar with it, but the key here, we are talking about the historical elements.
Right.
And my point is that Christianity stands or falls on the truth of certain facts of history. Now, if those facts of history aren't facts, then Christianity is done for. So it is falsifiable. Actually, in quite a number of ways, the Christian view of reality is falsifiable. And that means it's verifiable, at least in principle. If you have reasons or evidences that could inveigh against the truth of Christianity, then similar kinds of evidences might inveigh in favor of the truth. I do want to ask you about a dichotomy that, Justin, it seemed that you were working with a little bit. I might have misunderstood you, but you seem to be dichotomizing justification and evidences and then the faith issue over here. Okay, so I'm confused. I want to ask you what you mean when you talk about faith.
Well, there was a lot. I'm not sure if it's scriptural or if it was just sort of a platitude that went around when I was in the church, but saved by faith.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so like if one is saved by faith, what's with all the evidence? Like it'll be faith at the end of the day, a sort of leap of faith. So I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna confess the name of Jesus and I'm gonna believe. That seems different than a good argument as to why I should do something. You know what I mean? So, like somebody might be able to give me a good argument as to why I should get vaccinated or something, but it's not the same thing as doing it by faith.
So when you have an argument for vaccination, you're convinced, and you go to the doctor's office, and then they stick a needle in your arm. Are you ever exercising any faith in that doctor and the needle and the vaccination to protect you in the future? Of
Yep.
course you are. Yeah. But it's not divorced from the reasons that you go into the doctor and have that done, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Correct.
so this is exactly the same circumstance we find in the New Testament. Although what you just described is a mistaken idea, I think, that a lot of people have, even Christians. So let me just cite a passage. It's easy to find. It's the end of the Gospel of John, where John tells the reason why he wrote the Gospel. And what he says there, and by the way, curiously, this is right after Doubting Thomas does his number with Jesus, the very next verse.
I like doubting Thomas. He
Huh?
was he was the only one that got to stick his fingers right in Jesus's
Yeah, there you go.
crucifixion
Well,
holes.
he wasn't too happy about that at the moment, by the way. But yeah, because he was being chastised by Jesus
He got
for
closest, in my opinion. The
he
doubter.
wasn't. Well, the one of the other gospels mentions that some doubted because they didn't believe the other disciples who had
Mhm.
seen Jesus. And that's talking about Thomas, because he was the only other one that was doubting the resurrection, even though all of his buddies said, we had dinner with him, kind of deal. Okay,
Mhm.
so here's what John says at the end of John. And I think this goes right to the issue and to this confusion I think that a lot of people have, which is why I asked the question. And John says, many other signs and wonders Jesus performed that were not written in this book. In other words, he performed a lot of miracles that John didn't record. But these, and John records 7 miracles, these I have recorded in order, watch the language, in order that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and in believing have life in his name.
Mhm.
So notice the believing, or the faith, if you will, is not absent evidence. It's based on the evidence, and the consequence of putting your trust, your faith, because of the evidence is
Yeah.
eternal life. Just like the shot illustration, and this people think, well, you got faith over here, that's what God wants. You got evidence over there. Or man, if you got evidence, then where's room for faith? Because they think of faith the way you characterize it as a leap or a blind leap. That is not the New Testament view. You look at the beginning of the book of Acts, and it says there, Luke's writing, and he says that Jesus presented himself with many convincing proofs.
But
Okay.
if it's proved beyond a doubt, it would not be faith.
Why?
Well, it doesn't require faith for me to breathe. It's like involuntary. But
Okay.
like for instance, like what I'm saying is,
I'm not sure that's a
I
parallel.
see the point that you're making in terms of like it's still faith. You still demonstrate a little bit of faith here and there, but the idea that I could prove with it, like some people may take all that evidence and still be skeptical. They're like,
Well, they
no,
could.
I like they may argue the historical validity and go,
Sure.
I'm not convinced yet. And then you go, well, some people, it's enough information, and then they have the faith, and then they can believe. But if it was fact beyond a shadow of a doubt, it seems to obliterate the room for faith.
Yeah, I that's the step I don't think is justified. Okay, all faith is an act of trust. The trust can be well justified with lots of evidence or not so well justified. And we make steps of trust all the time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in my parking lot in front of my house here, I got a 2014 F-150. It's a beautiful red Ford pickup truck. And it's got 3/4 of a tank. I mean, 1/4 of a tank full of gas. It's going to get me to my office tomorrow to do 7 radio shows.
Mm-hmm.
I have absolute, complete, full confidence that that thing could make the distance. But when I get into that vehicle, I'm exercising my trust in what I have confidence that it can do by turning on that key and driving it off. So I am fully invested with my faith, even though I'm fully convinced that it can do what I'm trusting it to do. It isn't like if you have too much confidence, then you're somehow undermining faith. That is the distorted concept of faith that has actually, it's a fairly recent development. If you go back to the Oxford English Dictionary, the OED, and that tracks the history of words forever in the English language, it wasn't until the late 18th century or late 19th century, the 1800s, that the word in early 20th, that the word faith took on the any notion of uncertainty or leap or
Mm-hmm.
blindness or anything. That's a complete twist recently. but that's not in the New Testament documents.
So is faith just another word for trust?
Absolutely.
So it's just
Pisteo
trust and
means
faith are synonymous.
in New Testament wise, yes.
Yeah.
Notice we got to zero in to what the New Testament teaches. When other people use the word faith, they often mean a leap of. Just kind of the way you were using it, Justin. So I wanted to qualify.
I did say leap, I think, didn't I?
Yeah,
I did.
You did.
I just mean it's fascinating to me because like we do watch Islamic content. We get suggested some videos, and there'll be a strong defense. There'll be like a strong historical, like I said, scientific defense of it. And you see this growing, but I got to imagine that 100 years ago, there, minus an internet, minus easily accessible to not easily, but accessible academic courses to the public for apologetics and that there might have been an even stronger pull towards faith. Maybe not a blind faith, maybe not a leap of faith, but faith sort of in the system, faith in this is the best we got. And as knowledge increases, there's a stronger defense, which is kind of what was reflected in my question of like, does God need defending?
It does sound, Justin, like you are still working with this equation that the more evidence, the less faith. And 100 years ago, you're using more faith because you have less evidence, you don't have the internet. But what I'm suggesting is, and you're welcome to do that if you want, but if we're talking about the way the New Testament uses the language, it is not using the language in that way. It is asking for trust, and it virtually always gives reasons why. Look at the 10 plagues. Back to the Exodus. Moses has this encounter with God at the burning bush, and God tells Moses, "Go back and tell Pharaoh to let my people go." Yeah, right. Why would he listen to me? That's in the dialogue. And he said, "Okay, pick up that staff, throw it down. Becomes a snake. Pick it up. Becomes a you show that to him." And then you do this, and this, bang, 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 will get his attention. Notice that the claims are all buttressed by evidence. Incidentally, it wasn't just Pharaoh that needed convincing. It was also the Hebrews, because he asked that question too in Exodus 3 or 4. And then it says in chapter 14, when Israel saw...
They were ridiculous. It was amazing how quickly the Hebrews lost their faith.
They're like every other human being, basically. It's the human nature kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
But notice the point there. When they saw these things, then they believed and they followed Moses. And the same thing in the New Testament. You have the rationale given. How about Jesus in Mark chapter 2? He declares for a paralytic, he says, your sins are forgiven. And the Jews, they're bugged. He said, how can you forgive sins? You can't do that. Only God can do that. And then he says this, in order that you may know that the Son of Man has the authority to forgive sins, I say to you, arise, take up your pallet and go home. So what he's doing is he's showing that something that is happening in the immaterial realm, forgiveness, which you can't see, by doing a miracle in the physical realm, you can. So they're tied together. So when people trust, believe, have faith that Jesus can forgive sins, it's going to be very confident because they saw the guy who get up. And by the way, the ones who didn't see it heard from the people who did. Mm-hmm. And so this guy gets lots of fame now. What has created a problem actually for him, too many crowds and too many people and blah, blah, blah. But nevertheless, how this spread is because people saw miracles and then they told other people that they saw the miracles, and this is why they're following Jesus. And this has happened, by the way, with Muslims a lot too. Whenever I meet a Muslim, a former Muslim who is now a Christian, and by the way, it costs a Muslim to change convictions on this, especially outside of this country. All right. I ask them, whenever I find out that they've converted to Christianity, I ask if there's been any supernatural element in their life. And most of the time they say, yeah, I have visions, I had dreams, I had these different things. But notice they were so convinced of the truth of Christianity, they're going to make a change in their life that puts their life at risk. That's pretty strong conviction. That isn't blind faith there.
Well, I only have one more sort of intense question, I guess, and then I have kind of like a fun question. We went into like shaky turbulent water, and then So my last kind of tricky one is, have you ever met a Christian, or is there any Christian that you can think of that you do believe is a Christian, but they challenge you to some degree to ideologically, they have some views that almost sound sound or sort of tempting in a way or something like that. And I'm digging deep. Like this question involves vulnerability, you know what I mean? But I just think it's interesting, you know?
Right. Well, that would depend. It would require that I had some view that I held strongly, but I wasn't really convinced of, and someone else maybe come up with a different view. I'm reformed in my understanding of the work of the cross. Okay, so I think that God decides how grace is distributed. Now, I have a good friend, a colleague, William Lane Craig, who I've known for over 25 years, no, 30 years actually, done a lot of work with him. He's got a totally different view on this than I do. Now, there are certain things about his view that I think are really attractive to me, theologically attractive. I don't think they ultimately fit with what the scripture actually teaches, but I like aspects of it more. And so that creates a little bit of dissonance for me. I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance because my mind takes me to the text and and that's what I'm basing my own convictions on. But I think that Bill avoids certain challenges to Christianity because of the view that he holds, and that makes it less troublesome than the view that I hold. So I would say that's that's just about the only one that I can think of. I'm pretty much a mere Christianity kind of guy, and my foundation is the basics that Christians have held for the last 2,000 years, and it's tied to the Old Testament. So that structure is pretty sound. And I don't delve into things like end times prophecy stuff, so much. I did a lot of that when I was a fairly new Christian, but those to me aren't the main things or the plain things in my view. And it's better to stick with that than going off on tangents because those main things are the most important things too.
Oh, well then my fun question is going to be kind of lame.
Okay, well, let me ask because I have one more kind of deep one, and then we'll get into.
Come on! I thought we were over the
we could ask
intensity.
the fun. Well, you got the last few, so it's my turn. You mentioned a little bit farther back about eternal consequences, and I just wanted to come from an approach of the everyday man of what I see out in culture, maybe Western culture, and people's outside perspective when they look at what they consider organized religion. I think a lot of people they think of doctrines like hell and ethereal realms, and they think to themselves, man, that's a control tool that people use. If I can scare you enough to believe into something, I can get you to do anything. And they think that churches are just used to make you pay your 10% so you can get you in the door and and get you to do little tasks for the church or just be a part of their team so that it can validate what they already believe. The more people that are on the same team, the better it is for us, right? I'm just trying to give a blunt, honest perspective of what I see out there in the secular zeitgeist of and even in other forms of more open spirituality. We've probably considered some of that. More loosey-goosey where it's kind of find what you believe and go with that, and we're not going to hold you to some stringent line. And this is coming from a person, I know it's getting long-winded here, this is coming from a person who grew up in the church and had problems with all the carnal sins that all young boys do, and I find that even after I kind of left Christianity, I actually grew a deeper respect for the faith and see a lot of those rules have been as beneficial thing. There's some things in there that are beneficial and useful for helping me. And I felt after kind of giving up maybe some of the dogmatic sides of it, I was able to embody better some of the healthier habits of living a a regular life that is not so caught up by chasing materialism and just trying to feed the flesh and the carnal desires all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I know I said so much there, but
Yeah, there's a
maybe you can
lot to
jump on. Maybe you can jump
respond
on that.
to. Yeah. Well, part of the discomfort people have is with organized religion. You mentioned that, and I used to say the same thing, and this isn't condescension, but it didn't occur to me what I was actually saying, organized religion. So is disorganized religion better, And people who don't believe in organized religion, well, they can't get together for coffee and talk about it at Starbucks because now they're getting organized. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't think that's helpful when people dismiss religion like that. And even the dogma issues, I don't think people mind dogma. They don't like certain types of dogma. They love the dogma about love and acceptance and tolerance. That's fine, But the dogma about hell, that's another question. The real issue for me, fellas, is what is actually true. And a lot of this comes down, it's easy to simplify, it seems to me, by just going to Jesus. Most people like Jesus. They think, yeah, he's a pretty cool guy, and they'll cite him a lot of times to get him on their side. For example, it's not unusual for people to say, well, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, for example. And so my question is, so what? Why does that matter? Well, Jesus matters. So notice how people are acknowledging the importance of what Jesus had to say.
He shows up in other religions. He's
yeah.
You find him in other religions.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting that other religions want to co-opt Jesus, but Jesus didn't co-opt any other religions. All who came before me were thieves and robbers.
He was challenging the religion of the time, as far from my perspective.
He was challenging the abuse, the way that it had been distorted. Yes, okay, so then my point is on some of the dogmas that people don't like, sins that they don't want to acknowledge are sins, or what about final justice and punishment like hell, like that's pretty severe. Yeah. My question is, what did Jesus think? Well, Jesus believed in hell. He talked about it a lot. And as an appropriate punishment for people who did wrong. Now, most people, apart from the hell question, they don't want a loving government. They don't want a government who captures a murderer or a thief or a rapist or whatever and says, we love everybody, we're going to let them go back into the population. No, most people have a reaction to that. They're going to say, that ain't right. He didn't get what he deserved. He should have been punished for whatever, And I think that's an intuition of justice that we all have. And what Jesus is saying is there is a time where justice will be accomplished. There'll be a final analysis of everybody's life. Now, that's not going to look pretty. This is why the mercy he offers is so important. It's not just hell, there you are, you're going into hell, too bad, we don't like you, go to hell. It's not like that. Here is the consequence of your behaviors. You're going to have to stand before God, the judge, and give an account for your life. But there's a solution, and the solution is forgiveness. And Jesus secured the forgiveness by paying a price himself, which is why he said, come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus provides mercy. Trust in Jesus provides mercy. So to put it simply, either Jesus pays for us or we pay. That's a simple calculus.
Know your Jesus. I love that idea because there's some peculiar stuff in there, like when he curses the fig tree into non-existence.
Yeah.
Or not non-existence, but
well,
you know what I mean?
I
I do ruminate a lot on some of the excerpts, like Christ on the cross saying, I don't like moving past it quickly. The idea that one of the final things he said was a question to God. Why have you forsaken me? Or in the garden when he said, if this cup can be passed, let it be passed for me. And that he was sweating great drops of blood, or the fig tree situation. You know what I mean? Like the fig wasn't even a time of year for the figs, and
yeah,
that's it. no more figs. So know thy Jesus.
I don't
You know what
like
I mean?
figs
Like
anyway, so
like he's not messing
no
around in
love
some
lost on
sense.
the figs. No, you're right about
There's a
that.
severity that gets overlooked, I think, sometimes in people's
Hmm.
interpretation of Jesus. But
Hmm.
at the same time, there are people that will metaphor you to death. They'll be like, "That was a metaphor for this. That was it. Wasn't that people kind of sometimes pick and choose where something's literal or what they need it to mean based maybe on a cultural preference or some
Yeah,
sort
I
of
get it.
tradition preference."
Justin, this is where a reader's just going to have to read the text himself
Mm,
and ask themselves, is Jesus just being metaphoric here? Or is he
mm,
talking about genuine suffering that's a result of a final judgment? Now, when he says outer darkness and wailing and gnashing of teeth, all right, I don't know if it's going to be dark there or not, or if there's going to be teeth that are gnashing. But I'll tell you what, he's given those metaphors for a reason. Whatever it is that we're to understand, we're supposed to understand this. You don't want to go there
mm,
because this is the kind of language that he comes up with: fire, darkness, gnashing teeth, wailing. The
mm.
worm does not die, the fire does not go out. You don't want to go there. So even the metaphors are pressed into service for a literal point. And this is what a reader's going to have to do if he's going to be fair with any writer,
I
anything
agree.
that's written. He's going to have to
Yeah,
read it and say, what did, in this case, Jesus mean to be
yeah.
communicating? I think Jesus was offering a warning because people were at risk with a just and holy God, and also offering a way out, mercy and forgiveness. And that's what's so amazing about Jesus is he is truthful about the danger, and then he pays a price to rescue us if we are willing to be rescued. And people don't like the ideas. Look, there's a lot of things in the Bible I don't like. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if I like them or not. What matters is whether it's true and accurate or not. If what Jesus says can be relied on or not whether I think it's too dogmatic or something. And I think this is a danger, fellas, James and Justin. Then people are asking religious questions. They should not be asking the question, gee, I don't know, what do I like? What sounds good to me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because
Mm,
that's not the right question. Not for, I'm sorry, that's not the right question regarding this issue. The real question is what is true, whether I like it or not. And this is why I'm a Christian, because I think it's true, not because I like it.
You ever
But
heard of that verse that says, "Have you not read ye your gods"?
oh yeah, it's in John chapter 10.
Like, like, like all. I agree with you. I really do mean that. I like know thy Jesus or read it for yourself and decide and give it a read. And what is it really saying there? Because people could tell sermons about all kinds of things and extrapolate for a whole hour based on a verse this big. But there's a difference between reading it and researching yourself
Sure,
and
he's
all the
quoting
stuff.
from Psalm 80 something or other, and that's
Right.
in John 10. It actually is
But it is
somewhat a
it is
difficult passage.
possible. It is possible that when Christ says, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father," somebody may come to a different conclusion if they're not influenced by somebody saying what he meant was this. If they read, "Well, what could Jesus have meant by 'if you've seen me, you've seen the Father'? Or what about that verse that says ye are
Sure.
gods," or something like that? And I'm just throwing it out there. I am an advocate of reading things for yourself and being an apologist.
Right.
There's a sequitur here, which is we mentioned hell, we mentioned the gnashing of the teeth and all that bad stuff, and I see that brought up a lot in a lot of different religions. You know what I mean? Like this, like notions of hell or consequences of the wrong behavior, wrong decisions, or sin or whatever. But heaven, I don't remember heaven being talked about very much, and so this is a lame, childish question, but what do you expect from heaven? Anything? How much of your mind does heaven take up? Um,
Well, in my case, a lot because the hell question has been resolved for me a long time ago.
mm,
I realize that there's now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. And and Jesus makes this point. That was Paul I just cited, but Jesus makes this point over and over and over again: the safety of forgiveness that he provides. And I'm very comfortable in the grace of God, understanding the grace. I don't abuse it. That's not the point I'm making. I feel safe because of Jesus. So I don't think about hell. but I do think about what's coming. And I think about the difficulties in this life, which are significant. It's easy for Christians sometimes to wax eloquent, poetic, um, triumphal about their life as a Christian, and sometimes I
Victory.
don't think we've been honest about how hard it actually is.
Mm,
Right.
mm.
But and this, by the way, the New Testament is very clear on. The book of Hebrews was written to suffering Christians. The book of First Thessalonians to suffering Christians. Second Thessalonians, suffering Christians. First Peter, suffering Christians. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Second Timothy at least were written by Paul when he was in prison. I mean, this gives you a picture, right?
Mhm.
So now, as a follower of Jesus, in the midst of this, trying to live in an honorable way before him, make him proud of me, so to speak, want to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. I'm not working my way to heaven. I'm already in his family. I'm accepted in the beloved. Now I want to please him. And I want to deal with the struggles and hardships of this life in a way that brings honor to him so that when the time comes in that in the final heaven, I hear the well done, enter into the joy of the Lord. What that looks like is vague to me in some ways. Okay. Now there are things we can know about it. I actually wrote a book where I talked about this can I do this? Is that
Oh yeah,
shameless?
sure.
Okay. Called The Story
No.
of Reality. And if anybody lasted this far in the thing with us together, which I hope most of them do, you can go to a landing page where you can get a free chapter of that if you want to, and maybe get the book. But it tells the story. It's called The Story of Reality, how the world began, how it ends, and everything important that happens in between. So it gives the foundation that kind of from the beginning to the end of how this plays itself out in a coherent fashion. And the landing page, because this was the Diary of a CEO, DOAC landing page, they can just go to STR, that's stand to reason, str.org/DOAC. str.org/DOAC, and then they can sign up and download the chapter. And but in that book, when I get to the end, the ending is called perfect. The last chapter is called Perfect Mercy. There's perfect justice and perfect mercy. Those are the two options at the end. Perfect justice, not good.
Mm.
Perfect mercy, yeah, secured by Jesus. Now, what's that going to be like? Well, that's where it gets harder to describe because the New Testament describes a city with golden streets and stuff like that. That does not do anything for me. Okay. I don't want to live in a city with streets of gold, and I'm not into sitting on a lawn and having a picnic for the rest of my life, grooving on the angels. I think that there's a lot more that's involved in that. But what I describe there is a quality of our experience, a quality. So for one, we are not going to have any worries of any kind ever again. We're going to be completely safe. Now, none of us ever know that feeling, except for maybe when we're about like 2 months old or something. I don't know. We're still in the
Like
womb.
children, lest ye
Yeah, yeah.
become like children and
But
enter the kingdom.
there is no exactly. We're not going to have that worry. We're not going to have any anguish. We're not going to have to worry about getting things done in time because we can spend 1,000,000 years on one relationship and we've not used up any time, any finite amount of time, or that's not really the philosophically right way to put it. But we haven't, it's not a zero-sum game anymore. Time isn't. Now we've got forever and ever, right? And so that's going to create something. We're going to be in the presence of God. I love the way, and I put this at the end of the story of reality. I hope your people get this, who are interested in the big picture. And this has been, I think, a treatment of that will be accessible to them. And it's not heavily theological. It's not a lot of theological words. It's easy to read. But C.S. Lewis makes a comment that this comment for him is at the end of a wonderful essay that he wrote called uh, Weight of Glory. Weight of Glory. But at the end, he says, the door that we've been knocking on all of our lives will finally open.
Hmm.
And he's really good at characterizing the yearning that all of us have for this thing that we can't get here, this hunger that we have, but one day we will have it in him. Not everybody, because, even though everybody lives forever, they don't live happy. Not everybody lives happily ever after. But for those who put their trust in God's rescuer, then they become a member of his family, and they are invited to eternity to spend with him, to glorify him and enjoy him forever, as the Westminster Confession puts it. So I can't give you more concrete things. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and we are going to be on this earth in a resurrection body. It's not going to be the same physics. It's going to be all good. When you're my age, it's like everything hurts all the time. And I'm sure that you're starting to feel that yourselves.
Every age has an epoch of new surprises. So at our ages, we share stories of...
And we'll be doing meaningful things, meaningful work, enjoying activity that was made for us, but no toil. Toil comes after the fall. Work came before it. Meaningful activity. And you get satisfaction out of what you're doing, meaningful work, but there's toil involved with it as well. The toil will be gone. So these are all experiential elements of heaven. Right now, if I died, my spirit would go be with the Lord, but I would be I wouldn't be complete, because I'd need to be reunited with my body, because God made us to be physical and immaterial, spiritual at the same time, body and soul. But at the resurrection, there will be that reuniting. And there's other places in the New Testament that talks about that. And that's going to be deeply satisfying. So I'm looking forward to it. But in the meantime, I got work to do. And I'm really glad, James and Justin, that you've allowed me to do a little bit of that work here with you.
Thank you.
It's been
so
a lot
much.
of fun.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks so
for
much.
sharing your knowledge.
Maybe before we just close things out, if you do have it, you said it pretty eloquently right there, but maybe you could let our audience know where they can find you, other things you got going on, and
Sure.
all that good stuff, and we'll close out.
Yeah. Stand to Reason is the organization that I represent, and I'm the president because I founded it. So when you found it, you can make yourself president. And we got 20 staffers, and we've got a website with gazillions of things on it. It's just so deep and rich. That website is our acronym, str.org. Now, if you add a slash and DOAC, you can go to the landing page to pick up a chapter of the Story of Reality. I've got some other books too, but I think for most of your listeners, this would be the one that would be most satisfying to them, and give them an opportunity to think more carefully about Christianity as the story that it claims to be, the true story of reality. And go from there. Tire kickers are welcome, and I'm glad to be able to do what I can to answer your questions, as I've done, and I have my own podcast. I'm doing 7 shows tomorrow, so we spread those out over a couple of weeks. But people can go to str.org and go to the bottom and find all of that link stuff. I'm not into all the social media stuff. So I don't do that stuff. My team does. They do all kinds of stuff. So fortunately, I don't have to worry about it. But anyway, that's the place to go, to str.org, or you can go to YouTube and just put my name in there. Koukl is my last name. Things will come up on YouTube. We've got a great thing called Red Pen Logic. It's one of our team members, Tim Barnett, also a Canadian, to which I also offer condolences for the loss of the World Series just by this. He's from Toronto, so it's really painful for him. But his thing is called Red Pen Logic. It's just a lot of fun. It's like 6, 7, 8 minute vignettes answering challenges from TikTok and things like that. People have a lot of fun there. But anyway, that's what I would recommend to them.
Thanks so much
Beautiful.
again.
Thanks. This was great. Thanks so much for being on the show.
You're so welcome.